Hey guys, tonight we're going to do something just a little bit terrifying, but also kind of magical. In the way that How Am I Still Alive is magical. We're going to travel back in time to experience what it was like to be pregnant and give birth before hospitals, pain relief, or really much safety at all. Yes, my friend are going to have a baby. In ancient Mesopotamia. Without Google, painkillers, prenatal vitamins, or even the benefit of a midwife with clean fingernails. Honestly, you might not survive. But don't worry, we're going to go through it slowly, gently, with lots of soft descriptions and even softer sarcasm. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're here, drop a comment with your city and what time it is right now. It's always fun to see who's drifting off from where. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up to a rooster, not an alarm clock. You're in a sun-drenched mud brick house somewhere near the Euphrates River, in what modern maps would call southern Iraq. It's early morning, and the heat is already knocking at the door, and you are nauseous. Again. Congratulations, you're pregnant. You probably figured it out because your monthly bleeding stopped, and your belly started to bloat like the bread left too long in the clay oven. There are no pregnancy tests. Just symptoms, intuition, and the occasional dream where a goddess offers you a fig. Now, being pregnant in ancient Mesopotamia isn't exactly headline news. Women have babies. A lot of babies. You're probably married by 14, pregnant by 15, and already worried about how many of those babies might not make it. There's no formal prenatal care. No ultrasounds. No folic acid. You might get advice from an older neighbor who once delivered a baby by accident while sneezing, but that's about it. If you're lucky, your mother is still around to tell you what cravings mean and what herbs to chew on when you can't keep lentils down. But there's also a decent chance she died giving birth to your younger brother because, statistically, that happens. A lot. And yes, you're still expected to work. You're hauling water from the river, grinding barley, feeding goats, and trying not to puke in the millet. Resting is for noblewomen or the dead. Sometimes both. But the community watches you. If you faint, someone brings dates. If your ankles swell, they tie charms around your wrists. Magic and medicine are still best friends in this timeline. Your husband, meanwhile, is trying. He may bring you a pomegranate if he's particularly fond of you. Or he may just keep hoping it's a boy. There's pressure after all. Sons carry on the name, tend the fields, and eventually take care of their parents. Daughters just get married off like goats with opinions. Your belly grows. So does your discomfort. You can't sleep well, your back aches, and every time the baby kicks, you swear it's trying to escape through your ribs, but you endure, because everyone does, or tries. There are gods for this. Ninursag, goddess of fertility. Gula, healer of the sick. You've got tiny figurines tucked into corners of the house, and sometimes you whisper to them at night when the cramps worry you more than usual. As you approach the 9th month, you begin to notice changes. Your breath feels shorter. Your hips atch. Your belly feels like it's carrying a sack of wet bricks. You may not have a calendar, but your body is counting days in muscle memory and hormones. You might even have a dream. Mesopotamians were very into birth dreams. If you dream of holding a loaf of bread, good. That means an easy delivery. If you dream of drowning in the river, well, maybe keep that one to yourself. The days drag. You wait. You don't know what's coming next exactly, but you've seen other women do it. You've heard their screams, their songs, their prayers. You know the name of the midwife, and you hope she likes you. You've started collecting scraps of linen, not for the baby's clothes, but for bleeding. It's almost time. You feel it, not like a thunderclap, more like the slow pressure of a storm rolling in. And when it comes, there will be no hospital, no anesthesia, no backup plan. But for now, you lie on your woven mat, hands on your belly, and try to sleep through the heat, the noise, and the quiet, ticking fear. You're a woman in the ancient world, and your story has just begun. You wake to something new. Not pain exactly, but a tightness, a sort of deep, ancient pressure curling through your hips like a snake slowly uncoiling. It fades before you can name it. You blink in the half-light, wondering if you dreamed it. Then it comes again. This is it. Labor doesn't start with fanfare. No dramatic water breaking, no ambulance sirens, no frantic packing of a hospital bag because, well, what hospital? You have a mat, a jar of clean-ish water, some cloths, and a strong sense of hope. By now, word has spread. Maybe your mother-in-law is already muttering prayers while heating a pot of barley broth. The neighbor's daughter has been sent to fetch the midwife. You're told to stay calm, to lie on your side and breathe slowly. But when that pressure returns, heavier, deeper, as if the earth itself is pulling, you forget how to breathe at all. Your home becomes a soft chaos. Someone braids your hair to keep it from your face. Someone else drapes a cloth across the window to block the sun, making the room feel like a warm cave. The mat is replaced with fresh straw. You are not alone, but also somehow completely alone. Everyone around you is busy, talking, humming, praying. You are inside your body, fully, terribly inside. The midwife arrives. She's old, not elderly, but older than you by decades. Her hands are rough and steady. She smells like cumin and river clay. Her eyes, sharp. She doesn't say much, just nods once and kneels beside you. She's seen dozens of births, maybe hundreds. She touches your belly, listens with her ear pressed against your skin. Then she tells you what you already know. It's starting. Contractions come like waves now. Slow, rhythmic, and increasingly brutal. You try to ride them, but sometimes you just curl up and whimper into the mat. There's no shame. No one here expects you to be silent. You are encouraged to moan, cry, even scream. Some women chant. Others curse the gods, their husbands, and the day they were born. You cling to a thick rope that hangs from the ceiling. It's stained from years of use. It was your neighbor's once. Your sister-in-law too. The ceiling rope is ancient obstetrics. You pull against it during contractions, letting your upper body rise as your lower half endures the storm. There is no concept of dilation in numbers. No, you're at 6 centimeters. There is only the midwife's hand, checking gently, then not so gently. She gives vague instructions, almost there. Not yet. Breathe deeper. The pain is, how do you say this nicely? Horrific. It burns, pulls, crushes, expands. You feel like your hips are being torn open by invisible hands. You sweat. You shake. You swear you can feel your ancestors laughing at you from the afterlife. The women around you dab your forehead with cool cloves. One of them fans your face. Another massages your lower back. They offer you honey water to sip, but you barely taste it. It dribbles down your chin. You're trembling, curled around your belly like it's a wild beast. Time becomes impossible. Minutes blur into hours. You might have been in labor for a morning, or a day, or two. You don't know anymore. And then something shifts. The pressure changes. It drops lower, heavier, more urgent. Your body begins to push on its own. You grunt. The midwife tells you not to fight it. When the pain comes, push like you're angry, she says. You find that funny for half a second, then you're yelling again. This part, crowning they call it now, is fire. A full circle of burning, stretching, impossible sensation. Your skin feels like parchment tearing slowly, but there's no turning back. The baby's head is coming. The midwife crouches closer, calls for more clothes, more oil, more silence. You are groaning now. Animal sounds, timeless, wordless, real. The head appears, then disappears, then appears again. It takes multiple contractions. The baby twists inside you like it's trying to remember how to become human. And then, with a wet, warm slide, the child emerges. Obey your baby. But it's not over. The cord is still attached. The midwife doesn't cut it with scissors, there are none. Instead, she ties it with dyed thread and severs it with a shard of obsidian or a heated bronze knife. You barely notice. You are sobbing, shaking, half-conscious. The baby is rubbed down with cloth. If it cries, the room exhales. If not, the midwife will blow into its mouth, slap its feet, or swing it gently by the ankles. You don't want to know how often that last one happens. Tonight, you are lucky. Your baby wails. A small, angry sound like a goat startled in the dark. You laugh and cry at the same time. The women wrap the baby tightly and place it against your chest. Its skin is slick and purple, but it smells like new life, like clay and milk and something divine. You did it. No medicine, no doctors, no machines. Just you, a ceiling rope, a skilled midwife, and the unrelenting strength of a human body that somehow still surprises you. You're exhausted. Not the kind of tired that comes after a long walk or a sleepless night, but the kind that hits you when your body has crossed through something ancient, violent and holy. You've given birth. Your belly is still heavy and loose, your legs like reeds after a flood, but beside you, wrapped in faded linen, is your child. They are small. So small. Their head seems too big for their body, their fists clenched like they're still fighting the journey out. You don't know if it's a boy or girl yet. Someone told you in the chaos, but the words slipped right past you. Right now, all you know is that they are warm, and they are breathing, and they are yours. The women around you are already moving into cleanup mode. Clothes soaked in blood are bundled and taken away to be burned or buried. The floor mat is replaced. A fresh jug of water is brought. You're not expected to stand for hours. In fact, standing might be impossible. But you don't rest yet. You still have to deliver the placenta. It doesn't come out with the baby, as some might assume. It comes later. Maybe minutes, maybe hour. For some women, it slides out gently, almost as a relief. For others, it takes coaxing massages, gentle pressure, and more pushing, which at this point feels deeply unfair. The midwife is watching closely. The placenta matters, not just because it's part of the process, but because if it doesn't come out fully, it can kill you. Infections, fever, bleeding. You don't know the words for those things, but you've seen the results. You remember your cousin who bled for 3 days and never woke up again. You remember the quiet funeral, the baby wrapped in wool, the looks of guilt no one dared name. So the midwife waits. She watches. She kneads your belly, softly at first, then cry out, but she doesn't stop. You feel the last heaviness leave you, and with it, another wave of pain. Finally, she nods. It's done. You made it. Now you can rest. Except not quite. Because remember, this is the ancient world. You've just had a baby, but the next danger is already here. Infection, germs, bacteria, and viruses are invisible enemies no one has named yet. But they are everywhere. In the water, in the cloth, on hands that touched animals that morning. The word hygiene doesn't exist. Soap is a luxury. Cleanliness is religious, not medical. The midwife does what she knows. She smears crushed herbs near your thighs. She places a burnt offering to the gods of healing. Maybe Gula, maybe Damu the child healer. She ties a protective amulet to your wrist, made of lapis lazuli or clay. It's not sterile, but it's sacred. And sacred might be the only thing you've got. You lie back now. Your child sleeps, making tiny snuffling noises. You stare at the woven ceiling, watching dust motes drift through sunbeams. You think about how quiet the world feels. Even as goats bleed outside and someone argues over fish prices in the street. You think, I survived. And then I hope they survive too. Because here's the part that no one tells you softly. Half of all children won't make it past age 5. Maybe more. Fever, malnutrition, animal bites, accidents. God's being moody, death is normal. Childhood isn't guaranteed. That's why there are no painted nurseries. No long-term plans. You don't name the baby right away. Or if you do, you might pick something like second one, or the God gave. Something vague. Something careful. You are allowed to hope, of course. You are human. But hope is always a little quiet here. Around you, the house settles. The midwife finally leaves. She's paid not with coins, but with dried figs and a piece of cloth. You think about thanking her. Maybe you did. Maybe you just nodded with tears in your eyes and that was enough. And now, for the first time, you are alone. Just you. Your aging body and this new human being who is already hungry. You try to feed them. There is no bottle, no formula, no guidebook. There is just your breast and their instinct. They latch clumsily, like a kitten that forgot how mouths work. It hurts. Your nipples are already sore. But when they start sucking, a wave of something ancient passes through you. Love, maybe. Or relief. Or just animal comfort. You fall asleep like that. Wrapped around your child. The air heavy with heat and dust. Somewhere a dog barks. Somewhere someone is shouting about stolen dates. Life continues outside your door. But in here, you have become something new, a mother. In a world that doesn't guarantee tomorrow. And somehow, that makes this quiet moment, this very breath, feel like the most sacred miracle of all. When you wake again, it's dusk. The light filtering through the fabric at the window has changed, from sharp white to that dusty amber that makes everything feel soft and unreal. You don't remember falling asleep, but that's hardly surprising. Between the pain, the blood, and the pushing, a sleep-deprived blackout seems inevitable. Your baby is still beside you, still breathing, still alive. You shift slightly and immediately regret it. Everything hurts, your back, your thighs, your core. Especially the parts you can't name out loud. It feels like someone wrenched your skeleton apart and then stitched it together with reeds and hope. Sitting upright is an adventure. You use your arms, your elbows, a piece of folded cloth someone kindly left beside you. There's no such thing as a postpartum support pillow. There's a log, or a sack of millet. You lean on it and begin the next chapter of your life or recovery. Here's the thing no one ever advertises in ancient childbirth. The aftermath isn't gentle. There's no epidural hangover, no blood pressure monitor gently beeping. There's just reality. You're leaking from everywhere. Blood, fluids, milk. It's like your body decided to become a river for a while. The midwife warned you. "'Twill take a moon's turn," she said, meaning about 28 days. But you can already tell that's optimistic. There's a weight in your lower belly that hasn't gone away. When you stand, carefully, with help. It feels like your insides might fall out if you cough too hard, and if you tear. No stitches. No sterile thread. Just maybe some plant resin and the wish that it heals before it gets infected. Speaking of infection, you're constantly on alert for signs. Fever, chills, strange smells, though you're not sure how to separate strange from normal when the air smells like goats and fish 24/7. If something starts to rot inside you, you might not know until it's too late. You've seen it before. That woman down the street who got the shivers 5 days after giving birth, then fell asleep and never woke up. They said it was a curse. The midwife said it was bad air. You now know modern medicine would call it puerperal sepsis, bacterial infection from unsanitary delivery. But you don't have that word, so you just lie there, sniffing the air, hoping you'll know when something's wrong. The baby wakes up with a hiccup, then begins to cry. You pick them up, or try to. Your arms are weak, trembling. Your chest is still sore, but instinct is louder than pain. You cradle them against you. They root around, seeking warmth, seeking food. You guide them to your breast again, and this time the latch is quicker. Still hurts though. There are no lactation consultants, no ice packs, no fancy creams. Just maybe some mashed olive oil and someone telling you, "You'll get used to it." That phrase, "you'll get used to it," is practically the motto of motherhood here. You'll get used to leaking. You'll get used to your belly being soft and stretched. You'll get used to never sleeping more than 2 hours in a row. You'll get used to worrying constantly that your child will stop breathing in the middle of the night. No one offers you a "congratulations" card, but someone does bring a small gift, a carved wooden rattle, or maybe a lucky charm to ward off spirits. One neighbor suggests hanging garlic by the door. Another tells you to avoid bathing for at least a week, lest cold air slip into your womb. Is that real science? No. Do you do it anyway? Probably. Because what else do you have? You follow the advice because you can't afford to be wrong. Later that night, someone makes a stew. It's thin and oily but hot, and it tastes like gratitude. You eat it slowly with your fingers, careful not to spill any on the baby. The women in the house, your cousins, your sisters, your neighbors, sit around you, sharing stories of their own births. One of them delivered in a thunderstorm. Another had twins and didn't know until the second one arrived. You laugh. You wince. You realize with a kind of strange comfort that this pain makes you part of something bigger. It makes you one of them. A mother. The fire crackles nearby. Someone hums an old lullaby, one you vaguely remember your own mother singing when you were little. The baby stirs, then settles again. You watch their tiny chest rise and fall. Still breathing, you made it through the day. You're still alive. And tomorrow, you'll try again. The next few days blur together in the way only newborn days can. Time stretches, bends, and forgets how to behave. You don't know if it's morning or afternoon until someone tells you. You live in a cycle of feeding, wiping, bleeding, resting, if you can call it that, and repeating. One thing becomes very clear very quickly: there is no such thing as privacy. You are never alone. Someone is always nearby, checking on you, on the baby, on your posture, on your laundry pile, on how your womb is shrinking. You appreciate the help, really. But there's also a part of you that wants to crawl into a hole and just breathe for a minute. But in your time and place, birth is not a private affair. It's communal, generational. You are expected to recover publicly, surrounded by women who've all done it before, and feel very strongly that you should now do it right. Wrap tighter. One aunt says, tugging your belly cloth so firmly it knocks the breath out of you. It helps the womb return. Does it? Historians are still debating that. But in your culture, belly binding after birth is common practice. Linen wool, leather straps, even flattened bark in some places. It's supposed to help your body remember its shape. Whether it actually does that or just makes it harder to bend down is, well, TBD. Your breasts are swollen and sore. Your nipples look like they've been chewed on by small, angry fish. And honestly, they have. You try changing positions. Try squeezing out a little milk first to soften things. But it's a process of trial and error. Mostly error. Sometimes you cry, quietly, so the baby doesn't wake. There's no word for postpartum depression. Yet, there's no one asking, "How are you feeling?" in a serious tone. Emotions are expected, of course, but within reason. If you weep too much, someone might assume you're ungrateful or spiritually imbalanced. A priest might suggest prayers. A midwife might bring a potch of dried herbs to burn near your bed. You're just overwhelmed and tired and scared. Because you love this little human so deeply it makes your teeth ache. And yet, you also want to run into the hills and scream. It's confusing, but you keep going. You learn to swaddle quickly, really more tying than folding. Some cultures believe babies should be wrapped tightly so they grow straight and strong. Others leave the limbs free. Your child becomes a little bean burrito, arms tucked in, face peeking out like a monk in training, and then, around the third or fourth night, time has become irrelevant. The baby cries. Not the regular "I'm hungry" cry. This one is high, sharp, constant. No one sleeps. You walk back and forth, singing nonsense words, jiggling them on your hip until your bones feel hollow. Is it gas? Is it a spirit? Are you just bad at this? Everyone has advice. Some of it contradictory. Some of it suspiciously like guesses. Rub their feet with garlic. Bury a coin under the door. Burn goat hair by the bed. You try one. Or all. Nothing helps. Eventually, the baby stops crying. Mysteriously as they started. And you collapse beside them, wondering if this is your life now. Solving unsolvable mysteries with ancient guesses and zero sleep. By morning, the neighbors are already asking if you've resumed household duties. You want to laugh. You also want to cry. Mostly you want to sleep for 900 years, but instead you fetch water. Slowly. Carefully. You don't carry heavy jars yet, but you supervise. You instruct someone younger on how to stir the stew just right. You stitch a small tear in a tunic, even though your fingers keep cramping from tension. You are becoming, again, a person, not just a birthing vessel, not just a patient. You are re-entering your old world, but changed. And somewhere in your mind, a quiet thought grows. If I survive this moon, maybe I'll survive the next one. If the baby thrives this week, maybe they'll see their first harvest. That's how hope works in your world. Not in grand plans, but in bite-sized pieces. In one more breath, one more day. And tonight, as you lie on the mat, the baby finally asleep, you whisper a tiny prayer. Not to any specific God, just to the darkness itself. Let us both wake up again tomorrow. There's a rhythm to your new life now. Not a gentle lullaby rhythm, more like the thump, thump, thump of a drum someone left out in the rain. But still a rhythm. Wake. Feet. Change. Eat. Maybe bathe if you're lucky. Sleep if the baby allows. Wake again. Repeat. You've started keeping track of time by the length of your baby's nails. Somehow, they grow like weeds, even though you're feeding them nothing but what your body produces. You file them with a sliver of river stone, trying not to scratch their tiny skin or yours. The baby's cheeks are fuller now, pink with life. Their little eyes are starting to focus, just for a second or two. And you? Well, you're not fully healed, but you've stopped feeling like an open wound. Your neighbors and relatives begin asking about something else now. Naming. In your time and place, names aren't always given immediately. In many cultures before the modern era, babies didn't receive formal names until several days or even weeks after birth. Why? The sad truth, many didn't make it that long. Infant mortality was high, and naming a baby too early felt like tempting fate. You've known babies who were simply called the small one, or number 5, until their survival seemed more certain. In some regions, like early Rome, babies weren't named until the 8th or 9th day. In certain African or South Asian traditions, the naming ceremony might be delayed even longer, timed with lunar cycles or harvests. For now, your child has a nickname, something soft and silly like Bean or Cloudlet. You whisper it to them like a secret. But the real name, that needs thought, that needs ceremony. So you prepare. You clean the room where the midwife will return. You gather small offerings, a handful of lentils, a sprig of fresh herb, a piece of clean cloth. These aren't gifts for a deity necessarily, though they might be, but more like gifts to time and luck and the invisible threads that hold your family together. The naming ritual begins with smoke. Someone burns something fragrant, maybe sandalwood, maybe dried orange peel and bay leaves. The smell fills the room like memory. The baby is wrapped tightly, eyes wide, blinking at the sudden swirl of attention. The midwife says something in a voice you've only heard once before, during the birth itself. Low, firm, ritualistic. She's invoking protection, ancestors, maybe even past lives. You don't ask too many questions. You just hope it works. Then, the name is spoken aloud for the first time. It might be a name from your grandfather, or a great warrior, or a flower, or a dream someone had on the night you went into labor. In some cultures, names are chosen by birth order or moon phase. In others, by fate or a priest's dice roll. What's funny is, no matter how it's chosen, it always seems to fit. The baby doesn't cry. You take it as a sign, or maybe a coincidence. Either way, your heart expands a little more. Afterward, there's food, sweet things, if possible. Maybe honey cakes, if you're lucky and not living in a region where honey is sacred and off limits for infants. Or a mashed fruit offering, something to mark the day. And finally, Someone marks your baby. Maybe it's a string tied around the wrist. Maybe a small dot of charcoal on the forehead or heel. Not for style. This is protection. Against spirits. Against envy. Against the idea that something so perfect might draw too much attention. You feel a little ridiculous taking it all so seriously. And yet, you wouldn't dare skip it. Now that your child has a name, it becomes easier to imagine a future. You catch yourself daydreaming, what will they grow up to be? Will they herd goats or bake bread or carve bone needles or tell stories in the village square? Will they survive to adulthood? You don't say that one out loud. But in the quiet, when no one's watching, you kiss their forehead and whisper, "You've already made it farther than most." The next big question isn't, "How are you feeling?" No one really asks that, remember. But when will you return to your duties? Because rest, in your world, is a luxury. And luxuries have expiration dates. Maybe you're in ancient China where women were traditionally given a zu period. Literally, sitting the month. A whole month indoors, resting, eating warm soups, avoiding wind like it's an evil spirit. Sounds lovely, right? Except, well, the rules are strict. You're not allowed to wash your hair. You can't eat cold food. You can't cry. You definitely can't read. Reading is thought to hurt your eyes. Something to do with ki. Your life energy, still being fragile. Or maybe you're in medieval Europe, where there's no official recovery period. Once the bleeding slows and you can stand without wobbling, you're expected to resume household tasks. Stir the stew, sweep the hearth, milk the goat. Because, let's face it, no one else has been doing it quite right in your absence. You move like someone wearing a body for the first time. Your back aches. Your hips feel like they've been unscrewed and reattached slightly off-center. And you're still bleeding. Loki, it's called. A mix of blood, mucus, and uterine lining. It can last for weeks. You didn't know that. You thought once the baby came out, you were done. A spoiler, you are very much not done. No one really talks about it. But postpartum bleeding is universal. Across time and culture, women have used moss cloth, even animal fur, as absorbent padding. In some Native American tribes, a cattail fluff was prized. In ancient Egypt, they may have used softened papyrus. No one invented elastic or adhesive strips yet, and forget washing machines. So, you learn to walk carefully. Not just from soreness, but because if you move wrong, your padding shifts, and that, my friend, can be catastrophic. Meanwhile, your body is doing weird things. You sweat through your clothes at night. You cry at the drop of a wooden spoon. You feel either ravenous or nose-eated, and your hair starts falling out in clumps. Is that normal? Historians say yes, mostly. Hormones go on a bit of a roller coaster. Your body is rebalancing after the hormonal concert that is pregnancy and birth. Some ancient texts attribute the mood swings to evil winds or wandering wombs. Others blame demons. You just know you cried when your favorite cup cracked, and that felt like the end of the world. Around this time, people start looking at you sideways if you're not back to work. Some women hide their fatigue. Others fake it. A few lucky ones. Wealthy merchants' wives, noblewomen, priestess mothers, get real help. But most people, they soldier on. Because survival doesn't pause just because your uterus is confused. You're sitting by the fire one evening, stitching a torn sleeve, when someone drops by with advice. It's always advice. You should bathe with ginger root, they say. It keeps the bad blood from settling. You nod politely. You're not sure if it's true. No one is. Scholars still debate the effectiveness of historical postpartum practices. Some were rooted in keen observation. Others not so much. You try the ginger root. It smells nice. At least. You also try not to think about whether you're doing it right. You've heard of other women who never quite came back after giving birth. Some went quiet and never spoke again. Others wandered into the woods one day and didn't return. No one uses the words postpartum psychosis, but they do say things like, "She got touched by the moon." You don't feel touched by the moon. You feel touched by fatigue and fear, and sometimes an almost frightening joy, because there are moments, brief, fleeting, when the baby looks at you and sees you, and for a second everything else fades. Then they spit up down your tunic, and reality resumes. At night, you still bleed a little. You still ache, but you also notice the stars again. You catch yourself humming while you sort lentils. You correct someone's posture while they lift a jar and feel smug about it. You're coming back, slowly, unevenly, and no one claps for you. No one throws you a "you survived childbirth" party. But one of the older women in the village passes you a warm bowl of rice with an extra splash of honey and says, "You're doing fine." And you believe her. You've reached a delicate time in your journey. What some today might call the fourth trimester, though no one in your village would know what that means. To them, and to you, this is just life continuing. Your baby now makes more than just sleepy squeaks. They've discovered the art of yelling. Not words, just raw, opinionated sound. You find it simultaneously alarming and adorable. Feeding takes up most of your hours. If you're nursing, you've likely settled into a pattern. But pattern is a generous word. Sometimes your body forgets to cooperate. You might leak unexpectedly, or not produce enough. You might get sore. Deep, burning sore. Infections like mastitis have haunted new mothers across time. Redness, fever, aching, ancient remedies. Boiled cabbage leaves, clove poultices. Or just try not to think about it. If you're not nursing, you're doing something else. Chewing food into paste and feeding it from your finger. Or soaking bread in water, or giving milk from an animal. Donkey milk in some regions. Goat in others. In parts of the ancient world, feeding another's child was a full profession. The wet nurse. You might even be one someday. But for now, it's your own baby whose hunger you attended to day and night. Again and again. Sleep. Let's not even talk about sleep. No one is sleeping. Historically, there was no such thing as sleep training. Babies cried, and mothers responded. Or sometimes didn't. In some cultures, babies were worn all day in wraps and slings. In others, they were left in baskets or slung over cradles with counterweights. The Mongols swaddled tightly and left babies in carts while tending livestock. Some Polynesian communities kept babies skin to skin nearly 24/7. In colder climates, everyone just tried to keep the baby alive and warm. You wrap your child snugly, nose to nose. You breathe in their milky scent. Some nights, your body feels like a sack of stones, but your arms never drop them. Meanwhile, society expects you to smile again, somewhere between birth and now. Your body has become public commentary. You're glowing, they say, and you're not sure if that's a compliment or just the way grease reflects candlelight. You should be grateful, someone else says. At least you're not alone. You are alone sometimes, even when surrounded by people. The act of loneliness, real, soul deep, is another thing history doesn't write much about, but you know it well. The kind of quiet that arrives after the baby's asleep, and you're staring at your own shadow on the wall, wondering if you'll ever feel like yourself again. Will you? The answer, historians suspect, is sort of. Because motherhood changes you. Not just your body, though that's obvious enough, but your mind, your rhythms, your way of seeing the world. You think differently now. You plan differently. You even worry differently. You don't worry about taxes or trade routes. You worry about teething. Speaking of which, yes, that's coming. But not yet. Right now, your baby smiles for the first time. It's small, probably gas-induced, but you don't care. You melt. The village healer sees you glowing again and mutters something about maternal spirits being pleased. You don't know if it's true, but you accept the blessing anyway. You begin to notice new things: how good sunlight feels when it hits your baby's toes, how different dirt smells in the morning, how strong you've quietly become. You don't think about it much, you just move forward. Because that's what mothers do, even when they're tired, even when they feel invisible. Some nights, you sit by the fire with another new mother. You don't talk much, just exchange glances that say me too. One of you starts humming a lullaby, one passed down for generations. You don't know who wrote it, and it doesn't matter. The words are nonsense anyway, but they soothe. They stitch something inside you back together. And slowly, you begin to remember, you're not just surviving, you're growing. You're in your third moon of motherhood now, maybe your fourth. Days blur, seasons edge forward. The baby is heavier in your arms, more curious, more vocal. You, meanwhile, have become someone else entirely. Still you, but stretched, wiser, a little sore in the knees. By now, you're an expert in the ancient art of doing everything one-handed. You stir porridge while holding a baby. You sweep the floor with a child strapped to your back. You relieve yourself with a toddler clinging to your shawl. Privacy. Oh, that's a myth. An old wives' tale. Something for the unmarried or the extremely wealthy. And yet you've never been more attuned to time. You know exactly how long a boiled root takes to soften. You can judge a baby's mood by the pitch of their yawn. You've learned to sleep in 10-minute increments and wake before they do, like magic. In the broader timeline of history, your daily rhythm might look simple. But let's break that illusion. There is nothing simple about keeping a small human alive with nothing but your own sore hands, a few worn tools, and inherited wisdom passed in whispers. You have no thermometer, no bibs, no pediatrician with a clipboard. Just your instincts and maybe a neighbor who had 7 kids and probably knows what that rash is. Your baby begins to teethy. It is, to put it gently, a disaster. They chew everything, your fingers, their own fists, the corner of the woven mat. In some cultures, mothers soften leather straps for babies to gnaw. Others chill smooth stones. Some give them dried fish skins. You don't have many choices, so you give them a strip of cloth soaked in boiled herbs. It works until it doesn't. The crying comes in waves. You bounce. You rock. You chant. You weep in sync. But then, just as you're about to fold into despair, they fall asleep in your arms, drool pooling at your collarbone, the first tiny tooth gleaming like a pearl when you peek. You've survived the first one. A village woman sees the tooth and spits over her shoulder 3 times. Protection, she says. You don't ask for what. Superstitions follow children like shadows. Maybe you tie a red string to your baby's ankle to ward off jealous spirits. Maybe you burn juniper by the cradle. Maybe you avoid saying how healthy they look, because compliments attract bad luck. These aren't silly beliefs, not to you. They're safety nets in a world with few certainties. Historical records often skip over this part. They talk about dynasties, battles, kings, empires. But they miss how entire civilizations were kept alive by mothers rocking colicky infants beside smoky fires. You wish someone would write that down. Scholars today still debate the infant mortality rates in different eras, but no one disputes that the risks were high. Every fever felt like a gamble. Every cuff a cliff edge. So you become fluent in prevention. You warm the baby's clothes before dressing them. You test food with your lips. You bless the well water. You pace during thunderstorms, whispering old prayers from your grandmother's mouth, and still you doubt yourself. Often, that feeling isn't modern. Mothers thousands of years ago felt the same twinge when their baby cried for no reason. The same panic when they wouldn't feed. The same guilt when they snapped after the 5th night of no sleep. And yet look at you. You're managing, not perfectly, not gracefully, but consistently. Your body is softer now, your hair thinner, but your eyes are sharp. You spot danger before it arrives. You smell spoiled food before anyone else does. You can lift a bucket of water with one hand while balancing a child on your hip. You are becoming a quiet legend, one that history rarely names. And tomorrow, you'll do it all again. Your baby has started crawling, or whatever version of crawling exists in your time. Maybe it's a belly scoot on packed dirt floors, or an awkward shuffle across straw mats. Either way, they're mobile now. And your life, well, it just got a lot more athletic. Your legs are sore from squatting. Your eyes are sharper than a hawk's. You can spot a pebble small enough to choke on from across the room. You spend entire days redirecting tiny hands away from fire pits, sharp tools, and other people's ankles. You didn't know no could be said so many different ways. In your culture, the rules around parenting are mostly unwritten, but strongly enforced. Maybe children are supposed to be seen and not heard, or maybe the village believes in free roaming, letting kids tumble and explore. Either way, you find yourself constantly negotiating between protection and freedom. Let's talk about baby proofing, because, well, you don't have any. No outlet covers, no baby gates, no soft-cornered furniture. Instead, you rely on vigilance, intuition, and the occasional dramatic gasp to make your child pause mid-disaster. Sometimes it works. Sometimes they eat dirt anyway. And here's a fun fact: dirt eating, or gyophagia, has been documented in cultures worldwide. It's not just a weird toddler thing. It's something people of all ages have done throughout history. Sometimes for minerals, sometimes due to famine, sometimes because nobody told them not to. Your baby licks a clay wall, you sigh and move on. Mealtime becomes its own saga. You introduce solids. Sort of. Maybe it's mashed roots, maybe it's bits of boiled grains, maybe it's a mystery stew with yesterday's leftovers. You chew food first, because that's how your grandmother did it. It's gross and oddly sweet at the same time. You've become a one-person blender. And yet, there's a strange beauty to all of it. The little sounds your baby makes when they discover their tongue. The way they fall asleep mid-meal, head in the bowl. The joy of watching them try to feed you in return, even if it's a half-mushed leaf. You don't own a mirror, but if you did, you might not recognize yourself. There's a new set to your jaw, a curve in your spine. You become a cradle, a shield, a living environment. And sometimes you miss who you were before. That's normal too. Mothers have always had inner lives, even if no one thought to write them down. Historians rarely talk about postpartum identity. But every archaeological dig of a cradleboard, every ancient mural of a nursing figure, every fragment of a lullaby hints at this universal tension. The person you used to be versus the person you've become. You might visit the river more now just to breathe. Maybe you bathe your baby there, the water cool and full of tiny fish. Maybe you watch the light shimmer off their skin and think, this is it. This is my whole world now. Then, they poop in the river, and you have to relocate. In many ancient communities, childcare wasn't just a mother's job. Older siblings helped. Aunties, cousins, even grandfathers. But sometimes, especially in isolated or nomadic cultures, it was just you, or mostly you. The phrase, "it takes a village," sounds lovely. But what if your village is overworked, half of it superstitious, and the other half thinks teething is caused by moonlight? You learn to trust your gut, even when it goes against tradition. A woman tells you not to let the baby touch their feet before noon. A man insists you shouldn't cut the child's fingernails until their first birthday. You nod politely, then sneak a trim when no one's looking, because your child is scratching their own face, and you'd rather deal with superstition than a scab. Modern parents have social media and forums. You have rumors, and maybe the midwife's niece who had twins last spring. Still, you find ways to connect. You swap stories, advice, sometimes even babysitting duties. You begin to realize you're not alone in feeling overwhelmed. That in every era, mothers have whispered the same midnight thoughts. Am I doing this right? Will they remember any of this? Is it okay that I'm exhausted and a little bored? Yes, it is. Your baby falls asleep in your arms again. You notice they no longer fit quite as neatly against your chest. You adjust instinctively. That's what motherhood is, 1,000 tiny adjustments. And tomorrow, you'll do it all again, this time with a child who climbs. Good luck. The baby now walks, wobbly, wide-legged, and with absolutely no sense of danger. But yes, they walk. Which means you chase all day. Your home, your whatever shape it takes, be it mud hut, longhouse, yurt, or tent, is suddenly a minefield of opportunities for disaster. Fire, water, sharp edges, low-hanging tools. You have a mental map of every potential bruise they could earn in the next 10 seconds. Congratulations. You now live in a full-time obstacle course. And while your child is learning how to stay upright, you're learning how to function on adrenaline and whatever food you manage to snatch between disasters. Historians rarely mention it, but mothers across time have perfected the art of eating meals in 2 bites while balancing a child on the hip and a crisis in the corner of one eye. Your mornings start before sunrise. Your nights never quite end. If you're lucky, your child sleeps through the night now. Sort of. But in most pre-modern cultures, night feeds and comfort cuddles don't just vanish after infancy. Many children sleep next to you well into toddlerhood and beyond. Family beds are the norm. Cribs are a modern luxury, and trust me, you'd kill for a modern crib right now. Your sleep is still light. A twig snapping outside, you're up. A soft cuff, instantly awake. Someone breathing funny 3 mats away, boom. You're out of bed with a pot of herbal tea in hand before anyone else even notices. You've become the unofficial night watch of your entire home. Let's talk about play. In your era, there are no plastic toys, no screen time, no Montessori shelves. But somehow your child finds plenty to do. A carved stick becomes a doll, a pile of bones sorted by size. Dirt, oh glorious dirt, is their favorite canvas. And you make toys from scraps. Twist cloth into little animals, tie knots and ropes. Sometimes you tell stories not because it's bedtime, but because it's tradition. Oral storytelling is the Netflix of your day. And yes, your child interrupts you constantly. One day they ask why the moon is round, or why fish don't drown. You don't always have answers, but you give them something, an old myth, a shrug, a laugh. Because curiosity is a sign of health, even if it's also a sign your break is over. Of course, not every culture views toddlers the same way. In some regions, toddlers are considered mini adults and are expected to help out early. Tending chickens, fetching water, learning to weave. In others, they're protected, pampered, or even feared because of old superstitions about spirits hiding in small bodies. You walk a line between these beliefs, figuring out what works for your child. Sometimes you get it wrong. One day, your child throws a fit in the middle of a trade market. You're mortified. You drag them away, hissing quiet warnings. Later, someone older laughs and tells you, "That one's got fire. Good, we need more fire." And you wonder for a moment if your child will be remembered in stories someday. You're raising them with no books, no parenting manuals, no timeouts. Just your memory, your instincts, and maybe a lullaby you sing the same way your great-grandmother did. It's messy, and it's magical. Now let's zoom out a bit. Archaeologists have found tiny footprints in cave dwellings, scattered beside adult ones. Clay dolls buried beside child skeletons, miniature tools, carefully carved for little hands. These echoes of toddlerhood whisper across centuries. But you're living the real thing. You know the smell of your child's hair in the morning sun, the weight of their body when they fall asleep in your lap, the exact squeaky sound they make when trying to say, bug. These aren't minor details, they're your whole life. And one day, decades from now, if you're lucky, someone might call this the early years. But you'll remember it as the time your child filled your world so completely that you forgot how quiet life was before them. You'll also remember the tantrums and the poop and the absolute refusal to wear shoes. It's okay. All of that means they're growing. And so are you. Your child speaks now, not just mama or no, so though you still hear that one about 300 times a day, but full sentences. Clumsy, adorable, wildly inaccurate sentences. They call chickens ski dogs. They insist clouds are made of bread. They refer to your neighbor as old sneeze. You don't correct them. Not really. Because every word feels like magic. Like alchemy, language has arrived and with it, a new kind of relationship between you and your small human. In many ancient cultures, children weren't expected to talk much in adult company. Speaking too much could be considered rude, disrespectful, or, depending on the region, just unnecessary. But that doesn't stop your child. They're a walking, talking poem in progress, and you're the primary audience. You spend entire mornings answering their questions. What do bees have knees? Can the sun eat the moon? Did I exist before the goats? Eventually, your responses become part mythology, part science, and part please stop asking that while I'm milking something. And speaking of milking things, your household contributions are back at full speed. You're weaving, carrying, grinding, mending, cooking, brewing, patching, fetching, teaching, tending, and sometimes screaming into a tree. Your child is technically old enough to help now, but mostly they just copy you. They sweep the same spot 42 times, they stir an empty pot, they carry 2 rocks and declare, I'm busy too. And they are busy becoming human. Discipline becomes a new chapter in your parenting manual, which, remember, exists only in your brain. Do you scold, lecture, hand out chores, ask the spirits for advice? Some communities use storytelling to shape behavior. Others use gentle shame or symbolic rituals. A few go full supernatural. If you throw your food again, the wind demon will steal your nose. You're experimenting. Soft warnings one day, stern eyebrows the next. Occasionally, you just bribe them with fruit. You start to see your child's personality bloom. Maybe they're cautious, watching before acting, or bold, charging into the neighbor's chicken coop with wild confidence. Maybe they're chatty or quiet, or prone to dramatic reenactments of things that never happened. This is the part where parents in all eras begin to wonder, who will they become? Will they become a healer, a weaver, a traveler, a keeper of stories, a disappointment to that one grumpy uncle? Only time you got time. Mostly, hopefully. Bedtime is now an elaborate ritual. You tell stories in a sing-song tone. You make up tales about the stars and why frogs are green. You hum, you sway, you repeat the same 3 lines of a lullaby 17 times. And then they pop back up like toast. I forgot to pee. My toe is lonely. I need to tell the goat a secret. Eventually they sleep. And in that rare silence, you finally hear your own thoughts again. Not all of them are comforting. Some are questions. Am I teaching them enough? What if they forget everything I worked so hard to show them? Will they remember how I smelled, or just how often I said no? These thoughts are timeless. A clay tablet from ancient Mesopotamia once recorded a father's concern that the child has not yet learned his duties, but has memorized the market songs. Basically, my kid knows all the jingles but won't do his chores. You feel that. And yet, you're also deeply proud. Even when they're sticky. Even when they're loud. Even when they ask you if the chicken has a soul while you're trying to light a fire in the rain. They're becoming themselves. With your fingerprints all over their tiny, growing world. And that's something even time can't erase. One morning you wake up, and your child isn't quite so little anymore. They're not toddling. They're running. Not babbling. They're negotiating. And somewhere along the way they've grown long legs and even longer opinions. Welcome to the almost big kid years. The age historians rarely describe in detail, but one that defines both of you in quieter ways. In most pre-modern societies, this is the time when real responsibilities begin to take shape. Not pretend sweeping or clumsy fetching, but actual tasks with real consequences. If you live in a farming village, they learn to weed fields, carry buckets, chase stubborn goats, or help grind grain with surprising efficiency. If your home is nomadic, they learn how to roll bedding, pack gear, or spot signs in the stars. You don't sit them down and give a speech about duty. You just hand them a basket and say, We need berries. And off they go. Sometimes they return with mushrooms instead, or a frog, or nothing. But each time they get better. This is also the age of dangerous curiosity. You might catch them sneaking toward the fire pit, climbing too high in a tree, or whispering to the neighbor kids about the cursed cave behind the hill. You start to realize that your warnings are now just suggestions to be weighed against personal thrill. So you adapt. You teach them what berries not to eat, how to avoid snakes, and, most importantly, how to recognize a bad idea before it becomes a bone break. Not that they always listen. Let's talk school. Formal education in pre-modern life varies wildly. In ancient Egypt, children of scribes learned to write on clay tablets. In medieval Europe, literacy was mostly reserved for the clergy. In parts of Asia, children studied poetry and calligraphy if they were lucky enough to be born into privilege. But for most kids, your kid included, learning happens through watching, imitating, and trial and error pain. You learn by doing. You mess up. You try again. Your child starts shadowing you, mimicking the way you stir soup, twist rope, gut fish, fold linens. You don't call it home X. It's just life. They also start asking questions that scrape a little deeper. Why did grandma die? Why can't I choose who I marry? Why do we pray when nothing changes? You don't always have answers. Sometimes, you just hold their hand and say, that's how the world is for now. And yet, something changes inside you too. You start seeing your own childhood through their eyes. The fears you once had. The small triumphs. The way you swore you'd never become the kind of adult who says, because I said so. Now look at you, let's talk clothes. Until now, your child wore whatever was practical, simple wrap, loose tunics, scrapped sewn together with love and the occasional frustration. But now they want choice. In many societies, this is the age when children are given their first grown-up garment. Maybe it's a belt, a pair of shoes, a scarf embroidered with the family symbol. It marks the slow transition from being a child to a small person with expectations. They wear it proudly, until they lose it, or trade it for a shiny rock, or give it to a goose. Children, after all, are still children. At night, you watch them sleep and realize their body already takes up twice the space it used to. Their breathing is deeper. Their face, once round and soft, has begun to carry hints of the adult they might someday become. And you feel it. That quiet ache. That sense that time is folding in on itself. You want to freeze this version of them forever, still innocent, still silly, still needing your hand to cross a river or your voice to chase away bad dreams. But you also want to see what they'll become. A traveler, a parent, a maker of jokes. So you hold them tighter when they're small and let go slower when they grow. This balance, too, is ancient. Across all cultures, parents have whispered bedtime blessings and silent pleas into the night. Please let them stay safe. Please let them stay kind. Please let me have more time. And tonight, as the moon slides over your roof and the wind shifts through old leaves, you whisper the same. Because you are a parent. And that never changes. The village is buzzing. Not with insects. Though yes, those too, but with talk. There's a festival coming. Or maybe a market. Or a passing troupe of performers who claim to juggle fire and speak 7 languages badly. Whatever it is, it's exciting. And your child is ready to burst from the seams of your daily life. This is their first real taste of the world beyond home. You remember yours? Barely. It involved a broken sandal, an inexplicable drum parade, and someone trying to sell you a goose disguised as a rare pet. Now it's their turn. You help them get dressed. For real this time. No half-tied tunics or suspiciously damp sleeves. This is festival best, market best, temple best. Maybe it's a borrowed sash or beads made from shell. They beam like royalty. You double-check for mud anyway. Out in the wider world, everything smells different. Sweat and spice. Dust and sweetmeats. Wet stone and cooked roots. You can almost taste the noise. Vendors shout in 5 dialects. Someone's playing a flute off-key but enthusiastically. There are so many feet. So many chickens. So many stories waiting to happen. Your child runs ahead, then back, then ahead again. Their face says, this is the biggest thing I've ever seen. Even if it's just 2 ox carts and a guy with a puppet. You hold their hand tighter than usual. Events like this aren't just entertainment in pre-modern life. They're economy, education, community, and reputation all rolled into one. You bump into someone selling purple fabric dyed from snail shells. You don't buy it, but you make the mental note. One day, you stop to watch a storyteller with no teeth and a voice like falling gravel. They spin tales of God's battles and love that conquers mountains. Your child is wide-eyed. Later, they'll repeat the stories with wild inaccuracies and added sound effects. At one booth, Someone is selling charms, guaranteed to make your goats loyal. You're skeptical. Your goats can't even commit to walking in a straight line. Still you consider it. You pick up things, touch textures, smell spices, trade a bundle of herbs for a copper pin. And all the while your child is watching. Not just watching, absorbing. They're learning how the world works, how people talk, how trade sounds, what dignity looks like, what kindness smells like, what it means to be one small part of a much bigger story. Later, when the crowd thins and the sun leans low, you both share some kind of treat. Maybe it's roasted honey nuts. Maybe it's a fermented berry drink that makes your child go cross-eyed. You laugh, out loud. A real one. You can't remember the last time. That night back home. Your child is electric. Buzzing with everything they saw. They act out the dancers, recite the stories, try to sell you your own spoon. You laugh again, and you feel something shift. They are becoming more than your child. They are becoming a person. Tomorrow, they will still forget to sweep the corner. They will still ask you of clouds of bones. But tonight they are full of the world. And so are you. You tuck them in, smooth their hair, and hold on to this day with both hands. Because in the great timeline of history, we remember the wars, the kings, the empires. But this was your empire. A wooden bead, a sticky hand, a smile full of dust, no crown necessary. You wake before the sun. It's harvest time, or migration time, or storm prep time. Whatever it is, it means you don't get to stay under your animal hide blanket pretending your joints don't ache. Your child, who used to sleep like a rock, now wakes easily too. They're lighter these days. Faster to rise, quicker to dress, even if their shirt is inside out. This morning, there's work to be done. The kind of work that takes all hands, big and small. You hand them a basket, or a bundle, or a shovel. And just like that, you're a team. There's no time to be sentimental. In pre-modern life, seasonal labor is life or death. You need enough stored for the lean months, enough patched to weather storms. Enough done before winter locks the world in ice or the sun dries everything to bone. Your child walks beside you, mimicking your pace. You watch them struggle with a task, lifting, stacking, sorting, and you wait. You wait that 1 second longer than comfort allows before stepping in. Because how else will they learn? This is the season where childhood and adulthood start blending like soup in the same pot. Let's say you're harvesting grain. The stalks itch, the chaff gets in your nose, and the sun always feels like it's doing this just to you. But there's rhythm in it. A kind of sleepy meditation. Snip, bundle, stack, smundle, stack. You don't talk much. But then your child says, "Why do the birds always know we're harvesting?" You blink. You've never thought about it. They probably watch us, you say. They learn patterns. Your child nods. Like me. You smile. You can't help it. In coastal communities, harvest means gathering fish, drying seaweed, or boiling shellfish by the dozen. Inland, it's often roots, tubers, wild greens, or tree fruits. Some families herd instead, driving sheep, yaks, reindeer, or llamas across etching landscapes. In every culture, the process is demanding, but also beautiful. You work shoulder to shoulder with others. Elders tell stories while their hands stay busy. Children race to finish first, then get distracted by frogs. Laughter bubbles up between the sweat. You lose track of hours. Your muscles start humming that strange, familiar tune. You're exhausted, but not unhappy. And as you glance at your child, now learning the difference between done and done right, you feel it again. That quiet surge of pride, so rooted and old it has no name. Let's talk injuries. Because oh yes, they happen. Your child trips over a rake, or cuts their hand on a splintered barrel, or gets a wasp in their tunic and performs a frantic impromptu dance. You patch them up with the efficiency of someone who's done this more times than you'd admit. A salve of something bitter. A wrap made from last year's festival cloth. They wince, then say, "Did you ever fall into a well?" You sigh. Twice. The lessons learned during this season go beyond muscle memory. Your child starts recognizing danger before it arrives. Clouds that mean rain. Birds that mean predators. Sounds that mean someone's gotten too quiet. They also learn to be useful without being asked. It's the little things. Stirring a pot before it burns, keeping the firewood dry, finding the one sock the goat didn't eat. And you learn to let go a little more. Because one day, they won't just be helping with the harvest. They'll be leading it, planning it, maybe even teaching someone younger how not to fall into the same well. Night falls early this season. The air cools quick. Your child is asleep in seconds. You sit near the door or under a roof of leaves or curled in a shared shelter, and you feel something ancient settle into your bones. The work was hard, the day was long, but it mattered. and tomorrow you'll do it again. Together. Your child is sick. Not the kind of sick that passes with a nap and some soup, but the kind where the air feels too still and every breath sounds like a question mark. Their skin is warm. Too warm. Their cheeks glow not from play but from fever. You touch their forehead with the back of your hand. Because that's what your mother did, and her mother before her. You're not sure what it tells you, but you do it anyway. And just like that, you're no longer the teacher. You're the helpless student. In the pre-modern world, illness is a frequent familiar guest, and often a terrifying one. There are no emergency rooms, no antibiotics, no digital thermometers. What you have is knowledge passed down through memory, through story superstition, and sometimes through absolute desperation. You boil water, or brew something bitter. Maybe you mash garlic into goat's milk, or burn a bundle of herbs and wave the smoke over their sleeping body. You do it because your grandmother swore by it, because the village midwife once cured a cough with it. Because when it's your child, you try everything. They lie there, quiet now, the kind of quiet you don't like, their little chest rising and falling like the tide, unpredictable and slow. You sit beside them, whispering nonsense, stroking hair, counting heartbeats, and praying, whatever that means to you. Let's say you're in medieval France. You might believe illness is caused by imbalance, too much phlegm, not enough black bile, or perhaps the stars are misaligned. You tie garlic at the bedpost, recite verses, sprinkle vinegar around the floorboards. Or maybe you're in ancient Peru. You grind coca leaves, press them to the skin, wrap the body in woven cloth, and hum a tune your own mother sang when you were sick. In some cultures, healers chant, drum, or draw symbols on the skin. In others, sickness is a test, a challenge given by gods or spirits or ancestors to prove your devotion. None of it guarantees recovery, but all of it says one thing: you are not alone, and neither is your child. You send someone to fetch help, maybe a neighbor, maybe the medicine woman who smells like moss and has 17 cats. Maybe you just beg the wind to carry your need to someone who can answer. And when help arrives, it looks different depending on where and when you are. In the Scottish Highlands, a poultice of nettles and honey. In the Song dynasty, a decoction of plum blossom, a careful balance of yin and yang. In the Maasai community, a ceremony of smoke, rhythm, and slow, low words that speak more to the soul than the lungs. History tells us that children's mortality rates were heartbreakingly high before the 20th century. Fever, diarrhea, infection, from what we'd call simple illnesses, could mean goodbye. But history also tells us something else. People fought for their children. In their own ways. With what they had, with all they had. You watch the healer work. They ask you questions you can't answer. You feel useless. You hate feeling useless. Your child stirs, murmurs something unintelligible. Their eyes flicker, then close again. You don't leave their side. Time becomes sticky, strange, measured in shallow breaths and damp cloths and the sound of your own heart doing gymnastics in your chest. And then maybe a sigh, a shift, a moment of calm. You don't believe it at first, but then their hand twitches, their brow cools, they ask for water, and you break. You cry, laugh, maybe, or sit completely still, afraid to move in case it was all a trick. Sometimes they recover, sometimes they don't. Tonight, let's say they do. Let's say you lie there with them tucked into your side, still warm, still weak, but there. Breathy. Real. You whisper, you scared me. They say, did I fight a monster? You say, and you won. Later you'll tell this story at a fire, and someone will say, it was the herbs. Another will say, it was the spirit's mercy. Another will say, just luck. But you'll know, it was all of it, and none of it. But mostly, it was love. You wake to the sound of voices outside, not angry ones, thankfully, but excited murmuring ones. A visitor has arrived, or maybe a small group. Either way, something unusual is happening. You sit up, stretch, and peek outside. Yep, strangers. They look tired, dusty, maybe a little wild-eyed. One of them is carrying something wrapped in cloth. Another holds a walking stick that might once have been a spear. The third is already deep in conversation with your neighbor, hands flying in a language you barely catch. Your child appears beside you like a shadow. Who are they? You shrug. Travelers, maybe. Traders. Story carriers. Because in a world before the internet, before trains and telegrams and the global village, information walks. Sometimes literally. This is your first brush with the wide world beyond your valley, your coastline, your caravan route. And it's a mix of suspicion and wonder. You want to know everything. And also maybe hide a little. Soon, someone, probably the loudest auntie, calls everyone to gather. The strangers will speak, share their news. Maybe trade goods or songs or strange recipes involving pickled eggs and crushed beetles. Your child clutches your hand. This is their first outside tale, and you realize it might be yours too. Tonight's fire burns brighter than usual. There's dried meat passed around. Someone's even brought out the good cups the travelers sit. They don't rush. The oldest among them speaks, slowly, deliberately, like each word weighs a coin. They talk of lands where the trees smell like lemons, of animals so tall they steal fruit from rooftops, of a war where both sides wore blue and nobody knew who was winning, of a medicine man who claimed he could see inside bones. Your child's eyes are wide as moons. You whisper, don't believe everything they say. But you also don't look away. They show you objects. Woven cloth from a desert tribe, beads made from bone, a curved blade from a frozen island. You trade what you can: smoked fish, a carved spoon, a memory of a local legend they haven't heard before. And this, perhaps more than anything, is how human knowledge grows by wandering. Let's pause to acknowledge something delightful. History has always been gossipy. Even in isolated villages, people knew more than you'd expect. News of a coronation, a flood, a comet streaking the sky. It would drift from one community to the next, carried by peddlers, pilgrims, healers, even soldiers with poor directions. And sometimes that information got warped. You once heard a tale about a kingdom ruled entirely by birds, or a lake that boiled people alive, or a woman who never died, just kept moving. Historians still argue over how accurate these traveler accounts were. Some say they were vital records of the ancient world. Others say they're half-truths and bedtime stories mashed together by overcooked brains. You think it's both. Your child asks, can I be a traveler someday? You say, only if you promise to come back and tell me everything. They nod solemnly, as if signing a contract with their soul. Later that night, after the guests have been given food, shelter, and suspicious side eyes from your great-uncle, you lie awake. You think about those far-off lands. You imagine lemon-scented trees and bone, beaded necklaces and skies that never go dark. And for the first time in a while, you don't feel small. You feel connected to something vast, to something human. Your child stirs beside you and whispers, did you hear what they said about flying machines? You chuckle. Let's not get carried away. But in the morning, you find yourself carving a little bird. Just in case. You've lived in your village for decades. It's not big, not famous, just a gentle cluster of homes, fields, and familiar footsteps. But today something shifts. A visitor arrives not to trade, not to tell stories, but to count. You squint as the stranger approaches. Their clothes are neat, almost too neat. They carry a scroll or maybe a notebook, a writing tool, and the air of someone who's both very curious and slightly judgmental. You brace yourself, because this isn't just any visitor. This is a census taker, or a tax collector, or a bureaucrat from a capital city you've only heard of in passing. Someone, somewhere, wants to know how many people live here, what crops you grow, what gods you whisper to, how many goats you own, and whether any of that should cost you more. They call your name, or something close to it, and you step forward. They ask questions like, how many members in your household? Do you own your home? Have you paid your dues? You answer carefully, because history has taught you that sometimes truth is dangerous, and silence is even worse. What they're doing seems simple, but you don't trust it, because you've heard the stories of names being written down only to vanish, of extra grain taken for the empire, of neighbors asked to fight in wars they didn't start. Let's say you live in Ming Dynasty China. The yellow registers record your family's names, ages, and property. You're taxed based on your labor, your land, even your salt. You whisper to your child, don't say we have 2 goats, just one. Let's say you live in the Inca Empire. Your entire village is a well-oiled machine, organized by 10 household units. Your labor is part of a larger tribute system called mita, a rotating obligation to build roads, store grain, or serve the emperor. You whisper to your child, stand tall, we work. That's what keeps us safe. Let's say you're part of a small indigenous group in early colonial America, and someone comes with parchment, asking how many souls live here, so they can parcel out your land to someone who's never seen it. You whisper to your child, or souls aren't theirs to count. And here's the strange thing about data in history. It's both a tool of order and a weapon of power. Academics today pore over ancient censuses, marveling at how detailed they were. But those same censuses were often the prelude to heavier taxes, stricter laws, or conscription notices. The more the rulers knew, the more they controlled. Yet at the same time, they preserved snapshots of people who would otherwise be forgotten. Like you. Your name might be one of those faded ink marks on a crumbling parchment somewhere. Historians might argue about whether you ever existed. But in that moment, as you stare at the person with the scroll, you exist vividly. You think, why do they need to know my chickens' names? You wonder, what happens if I lie? You realize they'll never capture the real you with a feather pen. After the stranger leaves, off to the next household, asking the same hollow questions, you sit with your child under the fig tree. You say, I told them your name was Swan. They laugh. That's not my name. You grin. Exactly. Because if someone's going to write you down in their version of history, you might as well make it a little weird. You wake up to a smell that isn't yours. It's sharp, earthy, and, strangely enough, faintly metallic. You sit up, sniff, and realize it's wafting from the home next door. Someone's brewing something, but not tea, not soup, something different. You wander over, casual, pretending to check on your neighbor's cat or borrow firewood. But really you want to know, what in the world are they cooking? Turns out it's not food, it's medicine. Or at least, their best guess at medicine. And thus begins your crash course in what healing looked like for most of human history. Before science caught up, and way before you could just Google, why does my back feel like a bundle of snakes? Tonight you're a sick person, or a caretaker, or just a curious soul who walked into the wrong hut at the wrong time. And you're about to witness, and maybe undergo, ancient medical practice. Let's set the scene. There's no anesthesia, no antiseptic, no understanding of germs. What you do have is herbs gathered by moonlight, the village bone setter who once fixed a goat's leg, a prayer whispered into the smoke of burning roots, a highly suspicious ointment that smells like fermented onions, and destiny. Someone examines your forehead and says, your humors are unbalanced. You nod because what else can you do? Let's talk about humors for a second. For over 500 years in Europe, people believed your body was ruled by four fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Feeling anxious? Too much yellow bile. Feeling lazy? You've got extra phlegm. Just got dumped. That's black bile, baby. Treatment? You might be boiled leeches, knives, or warm cups applied to draw out the excess. You ask, will this help? They say, well, it helped your cousin. You remember that your cousin died. But hey, he looked really balanced on his way out. Meanwhile, across the world, someone in ancient India prepares Ayurvedic remedies: turmeric, ashwagandha, and a careful diagnosis based on your doshas. In Egypt, a doctor might prescribe honey mixed with crocodile dung. Don't ask why. In the Amazon, a healer sings to a plant for 2 hours before applying it to your bruised knee. You lie down and think, I miss aspirin. Of course, not all ancient medicine was guesswork. Many remedies worked astonishingly well. Archaeologists have found 5,000-year-old prescriptions for willow bark tea, a natural source of salicylic acid, the ancestor of aspirin. Traditional Chinese medicine cataloged thousands of herbs. Indigenous healers in North America used echinacea, still common in modern cold treatments. And midwives? Don't get us started. They were walking encyclopedias, knots of muscle memory and community wisdom. But here's the twist for every brilliant insight. There was a deeply strange practice. History gives us poultices made from mashed snails. Trepanning, the act of drilling holes into skulls to release evil spirits. Even Korin readings, where a healer stares into your pee like it's a crystal ball. Historians still debate whether trepanation actually helped with things like seizures or head trauma, or whether people just thought it worked. You're glad your headache isn't that bad. Tonight, your healer bowls something thick and green. She applies it to your temples while muttering a chant about mountain winds and stubborn ancestors. Does it help? Oddly, yes. Maybe it's placebo. Maybe it's real. Maybe it's just nice to be taken care of. And that's what you start to notice. That medicine at its heart was also about comfort. Even if it didn't always work, it told you someone is trying. Your child asks, are we better yet? You smile. I think we're getting there. And as you drift off to sleep, the smell of those strange herbs in the air, you realize something kind of lovely. Humans have always been afraid of sickness. But we've also always been full of hope. It's late now. The fire has burned down low, casting soft amber light on the floor. You're wrapped in a thick blanket. Probably wool, probably scratchy, but warm. Your back aches a little. You've been sitting too long or maybe working too much, so you lay down, and someone begins to sing. But this isn't entertainment. It's not a lullaby. It's ritual. You're about to enter one of the oldest traditions humans have ever had, the cultural ceremony around birth. Not the birth itself. That part already happened. Painfully, loudly, probably in the corner of a room full of other people pretending not to listen. No, what we're talking about now is what comes next, the celebration, the fear, the rituals, the absolutely bizarre things people have done to make sure a baby survives and becomes part of the community. Across time and place, there's a common thread: birth is scary. Babies are fragile, and communities are determined to make it feel meaningful. Let's start with something simple. In parts of rural Europe, the people would place scissors under the pillow of a newborn, cut away bad spirits. In Mongolia, some families whispered the child's name to a fire, believing the smoke would carry their soul safely into the world. In the Yoruba tradition of Nigeria, naming ceremonies can last for days, each name carefully chosen to reflect hope, history, family lineage, or even the circumstances of the birth itself. You've just been born. Cool. Here's a name that means born during a thunderstorm while goats were giving birth nearby. No pressure. In Japan's Edo period, a newborn's first bath wasn't just about cleaning, it was spiritual. The water might include sake, salt, or symbolic herbs meant to protect against bad luck. In the Andes, newborns were sometimes wrapped in specific patterns that echoed the local landscape: mountains, rivers, crops. The child became part of the geography before they ever took a step. You begin to see a pattern. The world didn't just make people, it welcomed them. But not always gently. In ancient Sparta, as you might have heard, elders inspected newborns. The healthy were raised, the weak were not. Historians still debate how widespread or literal this practice was. Some say it was exaggerated, part of a reputation-building mythos. Others believe it reflected a harsh truth of survival-based societies. In the Arctic, Inuit communities traditionally placed newborns in seal skin garments for warmth. They were named after recently deceased family members, a way of keeping spirits close. You wonder, what would your name be? Maybe Gentle Evening Breeze. Maybe Listens to Too Many Podcasts. Maybe just Hope. Then there are mother-focused rituals. In some Indian traditions, new mothers were secluded for 40 days. Not as punishment but as protection. The community brought food, warmth, messages. Because healing takes time. In pre-modern Europe, a woman couldn't attend church until she'd been ritually churched. A kind of purification ceremony. Weirdly judgmental. Yes, but it also marked a return to public life. In West Africa, some midwives still perform a symbolic cutting of the cord ceremony days after birth, using a special plant or tool to honor ancestors and bind the new soul to the old. In some Native American cultures, placenta burial was essential. You'd bury it in a spot that symbolized the life path you wanted for the child. Near a river for flexibility, a tree for strength, a mountain for resilience. The placenta wasn't trash, it was a map. And then comes silence, after the singing, after the bathing, after the whispers and blessings. There's a moment when everyone leaves the room. It's just you and the baby. They look like a potato wrapped in fabric. They make weird noises. They already have opinions about how much sleep you're allowed. And still, you marvel, not just at them, but at the ritual of it all, because every gesture, every song, every herb and chant and name was really about you. The community saying, "We see you. We want you here. We're scared too, but we're going to pretend we've got this." As you wrap the baby a little tighter, you think, they'll never remember this. But someday someone might tell them, and that's what makes the ritual matter. It turns chaos into memory. It turns pain into a story. And tonight, as you finally let yourself drift into sleep, no screaming, no bleeding, just soft breathing, you smile. Because maybe, just maybe, history isn't just the wars and kings and maps. Maybe it's this. You've made it to the end. The fire's embers are down to a faint glow now, like the heartbeat of a story that's finally been told. Your body is still. The noises of the day, keys, footsteps, chores, have all melted into a warm, comforting hush. Somewhere far away in time, a mother hums to her baby. A healer folds herbs into cloth. A child is named under a starlit sky. And somehow, through thousands of years, all of that has made its way to you. Tonight wasn't about facts and dates and kings and kingdoms. It was about people. People who endured, who invented, who held on through uncertainty. People who, just like you, were scared and hopeful and tired. You might not remember every detail of what we whispered tonight. That's okay. Let it fade. Let it blur at the edges like a dream you wake from slowly. Let the rhythm of their lives lull you into yours. You're safe here. You're part of this long, strange, beautiful timeline. You are, in your own quiet way, a continuation of it all. So close your eyes, breathe a little deeper, and drift off gently.